Okay, I'm starting.
It's all right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My father had 9 children, and his first wife had 8, and then I was the son of Hida Togasaki, who married my dad after he had lost his first wife. The thing about it is that Dad came to the United States in 1887, and at that time there was no immigration into the United States, and the reason he came was to understand the new legal system in Japan better by looking at the U.S. legal system. And something else was that he told a big lie. And the lie was that he got into law school when he was 16, when you're supposed to be 18 into law school. So if he graduated at 19, he couldn't be a judge unless he was 21. And so he convinced the company to send him to the United States to study the U.S. system, and a company agreed to sponsor him to do that. And then I think I talked about how he got married, so let's skip that and let's go to his marriage. He was married in the 1894 or something, where and his first son was Kyoshi George, was born in 1895, and then after that his daughter Kazuo was born, and then it was Susumu was next, and then it was Mitsue, who became a nurse, Yoshie, a doctor, Chie, nurse. Whoops. Susumu was after Kazue, brother. And then there was Yoshie, Teru, and Yae. Yoshie was a doctor, Teru was a doctor, and Yae was a nurse. And then I was a boy after Dad married my mother. My parents were married in 1931. 1830. No, 1930s. Okay. My dad's first wife was very strong in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and was a very strong helper of people. So she was highly dedicated in helping all the children and small families that were there in Japantown in San Francisco. They got married, I think it was in 1984, and Dad really wanted to be a lawyer, but his wife talked him out of it. You'll never make money being a lawyer. You should go into business. And they actually started a store where the Geary Theater is today in San Francisco. And they sold children's dresses and dolls and things like that. And then they had the earthquake in there, and so he lost everything from that. And he still wanted to be a lawyer, but his wife said, "Oh, you'll never make money being a lawyer," and so he went into the import-export business right after that, and he did that until the beginning of the Second World War, and he actually went bankrupt 3 times, but he actually paid back everything, and so everybody got their money back before, and he finally decided that the reason I go bankrupt is because I don't have any money. I have debt. If I didn't have debt, I wouldn't go bankrupt. And so he actually changed his business model so he wouldn't have any debts.
We
And
already
he
talked
did
about
that.
that, actually.
What?
We already talked about that last time.
Okay. So anyway, the one advantage of that was when we were put into camps. After that, we didn't have any debt, and so that made doing it a very simple thing. It was just he had some inventory and so forth, but that was the only thing. And it also was the thing that allowed him to borrow a lot of money because people knew that here's a person that will do everything to pay it back, not run away from it. Okay, now as far as the family running goes, and this is mostly historical to me because I wasn't born, was that Kazue actually ran the family. She was the oldest daughter, and she took care of everyone, and the mother actually took care of other children because there were a lot of deaths there. It was, a lot of that was during Prohibition, and people were drinking like crazy and drinking bad booze and so forth. So a lot of the Japanese husbands died during that period. And so she really spent a huge amount of time with other families and making sure that, they had food and they're fed and everything was going on in their homes. And the person who really was the mother of the family was more Kazue than the real mother. And she just always was a helper of people and so forth. And it was extremely, she even worried about me a lot. And the biggest thing there was that Dad liked to argue, his legal background. So he would argue with the children. Well, when there were 8 children, they would get hit once a week or so. And then there was Shinobu, and he was the only one at home. All the others had gotten left. And so I got in these things daily. And Kazuo was always really concerned about the depression I'd be in because of that. But, and I told her, I says, don't have to worry. He says, I never win an argument with Dad, but I understand what's going on, so it doesn't bother me. And she was seriously concerned about that. And she was really cared about people very, very strongly, and was a great leader of the family, and ran the household extremely well. And
she was OBGYN, is that right?
Pardon me?
She was an OBGYN, is that right?
Yes.
Kazue?
Yes.
No. And Yoshi, what kind of doctor was she?
She was mainly in pediatrics, but she was. She actually started out in L.A. and worked more as a public person more than a single practitioner. So that was her thing. In fact, if we go back, like Kazuo was like a mother to everyone. I mean, she was older than all the other doctors and so forth, and she just loved being an OBGYN. That was her pleasure, and she would go to sleep, and and if I used the bathroom near her bedroom, she'd wake up because she wasn't in the calm sleep. There was a baby being delivered tomorrow, and that was what she worried about. And then she'd go, and I mean, she was excited. Every birth was a pleasure to her. It was never a chore to her, And she had a very large Japanese and Chinese participation in terms of patients. And she had very small hands, but she was very strong, and so, like on delivery, she could put her hands and pull them out, and she was known as the best delivery person. The people could afford her, among the Chinese, if she didn't have a conflict, she was the number one choice.
Where did she go to school, medical school?
She actually got a scholarship to Stanford and lived with the president of Stanford in their home.
Wow.
And they treated her so well, she was there and she was all ready to serve them and everything, and they'd say, "Whoa, sit this down." We have people here, and they did that, and the president of Stanford was a real help there. There's one statistics though that Dad Kazue and Bobby Togasaki, who is Kiyoshi's youngest son, have photographic memories. So everything they read, they remember. And Bobby and Kazue are fast readers, and Dad is a slow reader. So you couldn't believe the pile of books that Bobby would read on the train. And if I quote something, he'd just reel off the next sentence.
Wow.
Right there. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
They're both photographic.
That's amazing.
I always envied that,
Yeah,
but
me too.
couldn't do anything about that. And
So Yoshie, she went to Johns Hopkins?
yeah, Kazue actually graduated as a nurse.
Oh.
And Dad kept saying that, well, he didn't like her being a nurse. And I said, what Dad didn't like was you weren't there at dinner, because new nurses, their shift always covers dinner. And then the old experienced nurses, never have to do that. And that's what Dad didn't like. And when I told Kazue that, just, no, I'm wrong, you're right. That's exactly why Dad was mad. And he also supported her to get an MD degree. And in those days, there weren't that many schools that accepted women for MDs.
So where'd she go?
She went there's a school in Pennsylvania that only took women. So they were the original exceptional school, and essentially all the women who wanted to be MDs went there to get their MD degree. And then Yoshia was a superior student. I mean, she was incredibly organized.
Yeah.
And so she was the first Japanese that was Oriental that was accepted into Johns Hopkins. And a few years before that, only men were accepted. And I think they wanted her because they were not concerned about her graduating and things mundane things like that. And her organization was super. In fact, she actually spent time, weekends in Philadelphia helping Kazue. And
with school?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, she was very smart.
Oh, yeah. The organization that she had was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Kazue was, the number one person everybody wanted to have deliver their baby. And her love of that was just unreal. It was
that's great.
Joy, not work.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Lucky for her. And Aunt Teru, she was a
Teru was
psych nurse?
No, she was the public nurse. I mean, Teru never cared if she made money, and she would always say, doctor's supposed to be rich. I'm not rich, But if you...
she was a doctor, not a nurse, right?
Yeah, those three were the doctors, three
so
doctors, right? And she went to Sacramento and was the Sacramento doctor. And Aki and Mo and I went there and spent several summers there at our house. And she just, cared about serving people, not... Money was not... She didn't care if anyone paid a bill. And then the other thing she did that I was really impressed with was that if someone wanted to see her, like an old lady would be, most of them were very embarrassed, I'm wasting the time of the doctor.
Oh, people.
And she allocated 45 minutes to every new patient.
Wow.
And by that, she says, well, does it hurt at all? No. I mean, they assumed that the doctor wants to get rid of her, and she wouldn't let them. She said, you don't have any pains, and she would question them and diagnose them, in terms. They usually did have other problems than that, and everybody used to say, well, I don't know how she diagnoses people so well. It was kind of obvious why she diagnosed them well, and she didn't care if they ever paid the bill. That was not her goal. Was there, and then a lot of times I pick up the phone for her, when I was in Sacramento, and someone said some mother would talk about how ill she was feeling, and she'd say, "Oh, I'll see you at 5:30," and she would actually call somebody up that probably hadn't paid a bill and says, "Make dinner for 5, 3 children, 4 children and 1 adult," you know. And they would do it, and then she'd go pick it up, go over there, look at the patient, diagnose what's there, and have a slew of pills and so forth for her to try, and then give her that, and then if it wasn't too sick, she'd actually bathe the patient and feed all the kids, and do the laundry, and then come back and give them all baths. Just an incredible thing, and the reality of that really struck me is when I was in Macy's, and there was this Japanese girl that was at the counter, and she says, "Oh, do you know Dr. Taro?" She says, "Yeah, she's my half-sister, you know." And she says, "We would have not lived if it wasn't for her." You know, and that's the way she was. She never cared if she made money, anything, and her feelings for people were just unreal. And Kazuo loved child's delivery, and for her that was just a joy. I think she always thought she was overpaid by being paid for doing that. It's something that you want to do, and she was very strong, but she had very small hands, so she could do a lot of hand deliveries that a male doctor, person with large hands, couldn't perform. So she was known by both the Chinese and Japanese as being, if you want the right doctor, this is the one. So she was always highly booked and loved it. She also said that if I get sick, I got to save money, and for paying for a doctor's bill, hospital bills, and so forth. So she had this amount of money, and then this Mrs. Hori in Berkeley, they're one of the richest Japanese families in the U.S., and he found out what it was costing her per month to go into intensive care, and so she says, "Oh, there's no way I can collect that," and so and she decided not to save money, and she gave it to a lot of young students to make it pay for their college expenses. And so she paid for a huge number of students, to go to college, and they went through college, and with her support and with their families, they could have never done that. And so, and what was really sad was that later in her life, she had very serious memory problems, and so they said, "So we have to put her in this hospital." So I volunteered to help do it, and they said, "No, you don't need to do that." And what happened was these students created a fund, and they all donated into it, and it actually exceeded. She died before it was used up.
Wow.
And these were, a lot of the students who had never gone to college if it wasn't for Kazuo, and so they just rallied behind her right away, and her love of children is unreal. One time, I don't know if you and John remember, but we took mom and I and Grandma, the 5 of us, went to her house. And she opened the door, and God, you think oh my God, she's gonna fall over. Well, after 15 minutes with you and John, she was excited, energetic. There could have been no 2 better people than you and John being there, And this is just to reinforce the fact that her belief and love of children was just huge, and she was the real mother of the brothers sisters, and she was key for me too. And she really worried about me, and I just don't have to worry, but her caring was just unbelievable. And
But she never wanted kids of her own?
No. I mean, she had huge access to children, right?
Yeah, true.
I think that made a lot of difference. And she loved them. That was not superficial at all. And so that was there. So then, let's see, Mitsue was actually moved to Chicago after she graduated, and it's kind of a story that bugs me, but doesn't seem to bug Japanese. Is that she met this? He's either a dentist or a doctor in Chicago, But there's a Shinheimi is a level of people that are really looked down upon by the Japanese, and
What are they?
well, it's a class. It's kind of a low class people there, and this guy was
Japanese people?
yeah, Japanese.
Huh.
And
he was one of those.
yeah, that's what his family was. But I mean, he was a good doctor,
Okay.
and I mean, he was his actions, his beliefs, and everything else his education, everything else was totally off of that range.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as his mother was known to Mitsu's mother, he said, "You can't see him anymore."
Oh.
She totally forbid him from him, and that's when
That's what you don't.
she moved to Hawaii and then got married there. But that was Marietta and I can't remember her younger sister. The two of them were there, and their mother died in Hawaii, and father was a really nice man, really quiet guy, and he had ran this business, and the two daughters were really strong on getting Mitsu to marry the father.
Huh.
And she finally did, and she had two children of her own, two daughters. So they had four daughters there. The person she really wanted to marry, she never was able to marry.
Wow.
I'm not sure how this published this, but
Yeah, I didn't know that.
you get the. I'm trying to give you as much data as I know. And the marriage went well. They really, it was a very close knit family, and of course the daughters loved Mitsu, and there was this very close knit relationship all the way across there. So it wasn't totally negative, but cutting off the marriage was a really negative thing for Mitsu.
Yeah.
Because I think I mean, he clearly didn't fit the model of that group, and her mother didn't follow that. I don't know how my dad felt about it, but
Interesting.
that was there. And then Chia was probably the weakest health-wise of the daughters. Wonderful person, probably the strongest Christian among the daughters in terms of belief, and really wonderful person. And she actually had 3 children. 2 died, around the birth age, and then Sachi was the other one. Sachi's actually a year older than I am.
Yeah.
And she was totally accepted by the family, which is really positive. Nobody looks at her as poorly, and she never lived in a retarded child's home and so forth. So it's and she has a lot of ethic beliefs and things like that. Her mother and father taught her a lot of that, and a lot of it hit well with her. And I think the thing that was great was before that happened, Kazuo was doing wild things in the house.
Like what?
Well, she put electric cords right on top of the stove. I mean, just So,
why? She's not thinking?
You can ask her, and I don't think she'll give you an answer.
Oh, I can't ask her, but yeah.
And
Huh.
and so they
That's weird.
put a lock on the kitchen door, and at 1 o'clock in the morning she'd be running up and down the stairs and things, just and that's when Chia says you got to go into a rest,
Oh, okay, that's what
what got her in the rest home.
I got it.
And she was madder about that than you could.
Yeah, I believe it.
You could see that too.
Oh yeah.
But So, and Chia was really having trouble just managing that, and
Yeah.
I think a healthy person would have had trouble
Yeah.
managing that.
That's hard to.
And so they what happened was that all these people that Cosmo had helped all along
Mm-hmm.
actually funded her stay at the hospital,
Yeah.
and so the place was nice, but like one time we left you down in Union Square, you and John down in Union Square, and then we went to see her, at the hospital, and she said, "Oh, let me walk you to the elevator," and they go to the
I
elevator,
remember
and she
that.
says,
Yeah.
and finally says, "Well, we've got to pick John and Ann home," and she finally let me get away with that.
Yeah.
But because she loved children, I mean, that was unreal love there. And you talk about a person being in the right profession. That was it.
Yeah.
But so then Mitsu. Well, I told you about Mitsu that she couldn't marry the person she wanted to marry, and her parents, supported that. So that she actually moved to Hawaii, and then she lived that life, and Tokue, her husband, was really a nice man, very relatively quiet, and I think she did more of running the entire business than he did.
They didn't come over here very much, did they? 'Cause I don't remember.
Well, she traveled. Yeah, she came here. She didn't stay here anywhere long. She just jumped around and like I don't think she lived much. Had many common years with you.
Yeah, I
She
don't.
died
Okay.
when you were fairly young.
Oh, that's why. Because
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
remember her at all.
But she traveled like crazy all the time.
Oh, okay.
And in the end, her husband died, I think, in February, and then she died the day before Thanksgiving the same year.
Oh.
And they were quite far apart in age. I don't
Oh.
remember the exact numbers. But that was what was, and it was almost like she sold half the house to Marietta, the oldest one, and then gave money to the others, and like Nobuko got the grand piano, and I mean, she did all these things like, you're getting ready to die,
Wow.
and she did all of that, and then she stayed at the bottom of the.
Is that
there
Nobuko's
is-
mother?
Huh?
Is Nobuko's mother? That Mitsu?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Nobuko Hideko, and then the Marietta, and I gotta remember his name, but anyway, they had 4 daughters. And Marietta and the second daughter died first. And then, so let's see. Chia was health-wise one of the weaker ones, and she was very religious, and in fact, Dad wanted her to get married first, and she may have been the first one to get married. And she lived in Japan, and she's Sachi's
Right.
mother. And they, as I mentioned before, they lost the two other daughters, which I mean, she and I were close, and she was always supportive, but I always thought what a hard thing it was for her, losing
Yeah.
2 daughters,
Oh.
and third one being.
Yeah.
But Sachi's really a good person, though.
Very.
So really, really a positive thing there.
Yeah.
And let's see, Mitsue had that breakup. She was really mad that they broke up the marriage. Then moved to Hawaii, and she lived a good life over there. She had the 2 stepchildren, but they were like children. They weren't like, it wasn't like conflict. They were really close, and they wanted her to become their mother. It wasn't.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so that was always good, and with their problems and so forth, they always worked together on all that.
How about Uncle Kiyoshi?
Well, Kyoshi was he was born in 1895,
Okay.
and that was before the immigration of Japanese into Japan. So he was the eldest. You know, a lot of people, they would come over here and they get married. They'd get mail order brides,
Oh.
and then they come over here, get married, and then they start having children. And he ended up being a very strong leader in a number of things, both legal and socially. You know, like the Boy Scouts, YMCA, and so all of that.
Huh.
He would start because he was the oldest one there. Plus, his organization is unbelievably positive.
Huh.
And
He started the Boy Scouts for Japanese?
yeah, Japanese,
I
right,
see.
right,
Mm-hmm.
right. The troop
Oh,
that
I
was
see.
there,
Huh.
and he did these things, and everybody liked him because he was. If you saw him, you wouldn't even think he's Japanese. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, he had that air about
Yes.
him. Yeah, very
I mean, in
Western.
fact, whenever he gave a talk, he'd do it in front of a mirror, and really, every action, all of that was
Mapped out.
highly prepared before he did it, and he also did a lot of things with the city and so forth, and he ended up being like the prime representative for it, and it got done while he was there, and so. One key thing, Dad was heavily more involved, but they actually took all the Chinese and Japanese and put them into isolated schools. So if you were Japanese or Chinese, you went to elementary school. There's only one elementary school you could go to.
Oh.
And Dad actually fought that for 2 years and won. So that they integrated across schools, and Kiyoshi was very active in that thing as well, and you see Kiyoshi, he's not the model of what you think a Japanese student looks like, acts like, and so forth. So I think that helped a lot, and Dad had been through 2 years of judges school in Japan, so he would read all the things in U.S. law, and the people listening had no idea what the hell he was talking about. And in 2 years, they actually changed back to integrated schools. And I don't think it would have I don't think it would have happened,
right.
And it would have taken a lot longer, even if it did.
Yeah.
If Dad wasn't there.
Right.
And Kiyoshi was very strong as well, and neither of them fit the model that they had of a Japanese.
Yeah.
Which was also there.
That's interesting.
So he was really in the leader thing role. Now, in those days, if a second generation Japanese, or if a non-Japanese had a Japanese wife, the wife had to go back to Japan for 1 year after every 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, like, when Gordon and Emiko, when they were in grammar school, well, they'd have to live with Kazue. And so, and the mother would have to go back to Japan for a year. So, like, initially, Gordon would, be alone, and then Emiko and Gordon would be, here, and so she didn't like this idea of I'm their mother 2 out of 3 years. This didn't make sense to her. So she convinced Kiyoshi to study Japanese, and he did, and then he went over and he actually joined the Japan Times, and there were 2 executives there. The one to become the new president, and the president had to retire because of age.
Go ahead. Zoe, come here.
So she didn't want to, because as soon as Bobby started school, that all 3 of them would have to be left, and she didn't going to Japan alone, and so that was not positive for her. So she convinced Kiyoshi to go to Japan, and he established a great career in Japan, very, very highly thought of there. there as well. So that was probably a reasonably good decision. And Dad was working very strongly on laws during this period, like, you know, the not forcing people to, you know, go to, not being able to become a citizen of the United States and all of that. My mother, it's really interesting, my mother, after that law was passed, she said, Shinobu really wanted me to be a U.S. citizen. And so she actually started a school, because, you know, she was better in English than the other Japanese families. So she actually started a school and taught these others and really knew the citizenship requirements thoroughly, you know. And I didn't feel like arguing with her, like I didn't want her to be a U.S. citizen, because I mean, that was fine with me, but it was not created by me or, you know, gnawing my stomach. But so we never had an argument about that, and she told all her friends I was the cause of it, which was fine. You know, it's just things happen in Japanese families differently than American families, and I was about to call her a liar. But so the thing, Kazuya was the mother of the family, and her mother really worried about the Japanese families in San Francisco, and worried about, you know, what was happening to them, and you know, how they were doing in education and so forth. She worked very hardly with other people. In fact, other people have said, oh, you know, talk to your father's first wife, and you know, and she says, I don't need to go home there. The girls are taking care of that, you know. And Kazuya did an outstanding job, and she cared a lot. I probably told you this before, but you know, Kazuya was really concerned, because I was home with Dad alone, you know, 7 nights a week, and then he would argue with me because I was the only one there, while the others, you know, there were 8 of them, and they got hit like once a week at the most. And it never bothered me, because it just, I don't know, I knew who he was, and I always thought that whenever I was winning, he would go to the Bible, and he knew I wouldn't keep up with him there, so I would lose there. But I felt like when he did that, I was winning, not losing.
Right, probably.
So
yeah,
that was.
that's probably
so
true.
I didn't have like a mental thing, but you know, you couldn't believe how much concern Kazuo was about that. You know, it wasn't. I told her that, and says, "Well," I said, "Why don't you come over and shut up?" And you know, so I'm the only one that's attacking. And she came over one night, and she was kind of surprised. That I think the thing that she was most concerned about was I was being depressed, and I wasn't depressed at all. And I think that was.
No, I think you enjoyed the debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I know I'm going to lose, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
those are good skills.
Yeah. And so that was the Sim stayed in the U.S. and the way that was done was Dad, on the trip that Yoshiko went to Japan, he bought it was a mechanical typewriter, and that wrote kanji, and that's how, you know, they printed the newspapers and things. So he taught her how to use that, and he bought one, and then he brought it back to the United States, and then he put an ad in the paper for someone to use this typewriter, right? Kanji typewriter. And of course, nobody knew how to use it. No American knew how to use it. No Japanese knew how to use it either. And so she became the typist, and that was the only reason it was there was to keep her away from going to Japan every 3 years. And she got away with it, and that's what she did. And I don't think it did the business much good, except that the food was a lot better when she cooked it. But those are, you know, the kinds of things that you don't even think of today and yet were the unusual things. And I thought Dad did an outstanding job of managing those things, in the best way possible, so that you didn't have the mother going to Japan once every 3 years, which is really stupid. And then until after the war, that was the law. World War II.
Yeah.
So the only reason I bring this up is that the unnatural things that were all gone, in your life. There was a lot of that was there during that period.
Right.
And I think, my siblings and parents did an outstanding job of coping with it, and not being as passive about the entire thing, but being very active in terms of how that transpired. And I think it was, if a person had a problem or something, Dad was there to help. He would do that, and it was, as well as the others. It was not I'm trying to maximize my income was never a goal of anybody in the family, and it's never been a goal of mine either. That's not measuring. If I measure that way, I think I'm not living my life right.
I agree. Yeah.
And so that's
good values.
Yeah, and it makes life a lot easier to live too.
Yeah.
A huge difference in that versus the greed model, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And I think there was a huge death thing of the number of widows here was usually very high, and a lot of the people who came over and got married, they'd see this beautiful house, and the guy would be standing in front of this house, right? Had nothing to do with where he lived, but she thinks she's going to move in there, and you get into this room, and she didn't have the money to go back to Japan, and the attitude they took of it though was much stronger than you would expect. They decided, okay, I decided to come to the United States, and it wasn't SOB, really did it to me.
What does that have to do with the fact that there's a lot of widows?
No, one of the big problems was, that was during a good part of that period, there was prohibition.
Okay, so that's, okay.
So
I didn't know if
so bad alcohol was
I see.
a dominant
alcohol
thing.
Poisoning?
Yeah, or I don't know. It's just I don't think it was in a direct, like, it was bad alcohol. It wasn't controlled alcohol, but it wasn't. It was more people drinking stuff that they shouldn't have been drinking.
Okay.
And I don't think they wanted to kill them because they'd rather have more customers than fewer customers. So
right.
and there was just a huge number of problems with that during that period, and that's how Kennedy's father was. That's how he made his money, was in alcohol.
Joe? Oh.
He doesn't talk about it much, but it was also the reason.
Yeah,
it's also one of the reasons that he knew he couldn't run for president. He became ambassador to England.
Right.
And the reason for that was they made him in charge of the stock market.
In England?
No, it's in New York.
Oh.
And all these guys says, oh, this jerk is this idiot, drunkard is going to take over the stock market. And he knew all the bad things that these guys were doing better than they did. And he straightened out the stock market. And so Roosevelt actually sent him to the ambassadorship of England and sent him there as a thank you for what he did in terms of,
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the U.S. history. I mean, the taints here. The reason you mention it is, we've kind of talked about the taints of the Japanese, and the taints of the Americans were not better.
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And like Stanford, he built the railroad, and while he was building the railroad, they had all these mosquitoes, like in Utah and so forth, and these guys were dying. So what he did was he brought over Chinese, and their loss was huge.
Right.
And the thing he did with the Chinese, which is interesting, was that, like, when I went to Stanford, 2 freshmen were Japanese per year. Men were not, considered that way, and Chinese were huge in terms of the number of Chinese who were students at Stanford. Getting in was one of the easiest universities. They were considered special, and was more of the guilt thing of
the railroad.
Yeah, that he did, Stanford did,
Oh, that's
to
interesting.
the people there, and so it's kind of interesting when you kind of look at the nasty things, and he wasn't the only one, it was just a huge number of people acting that way about it, and it was more head count that he was concerned about with the Chinese than anything else, right? If I give Chinese, that's no loss. They've got so many people who just get more and then let them die. And it's really, when you think about it, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But that was probably closer to the norm of a lot of things, worldwide in that time frame.
Right.
But it just also kind of gives you some negative feelings about how the United States was built.
Oh, sure. There's plenty of negative
Oh, yeah,
things.
and it's just
Plenty.
horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. What else? Is there other things that you were talking about?
Yeah.
The daughters.
About Uncle Sam, we haven't talked about him much.
Yeah, Uncle Sim was
The jokester.
the two jokesters.
Yeah, eh?
Yeah, Yaya and Sim were the two, and he's kind of a helper type person. So I see him. I say, "Oh, I notice you're giving things to KQED for their auction." Oh, he says, "Oh, yeah, that's a good deal. I can deduct the retail price of the product for that, and then so I can take that all off, and I don't have to pay taxes on that." And I give him this thing, and I says, "Yeah." I says, "Oh, so those are the ones you don't sell." And all of a sudden, he had never thought of that, There's a three. Oh, yeah, you're right. But he was also very active in terms of getting a lot of the civil rights things supported. And he, the things, like a Japanese couldn't own a house. A Japanese citizen could not own a house in California.
When was that?
No.
What?
0.
No, when was that?
Oh, this was until after the war.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so,
I thought you owned Channing Way.
Well, Channing Way was actually owned by the unmarried daughters.
But they're Japanese.
No, they're U.S. citizens.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Japanese nationals.
Yeah.
Non-citizens.
Right,
okay,
non-citizens.
okay, sorry. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then they, during the war, they took, we moved to Salt Lake from camp in Utah, and and there you could actually legally own a house. And then we moved there, and then 6 weeks after we moved there, the government passed a law that said you can't take any money out of your bank account.
It was after the war.
No,
No.
during the war.
Oh, okay, okay.
And during World War II. Furthermore, pay us the rent that you've collected on all the houses in Berkeley that you've rented. It was all about houses in California, but all the so they fundamentally. So my dad says, "I'd be glad to send you the money, but
You froze my account.
yeah, my account's frozen." So the benevolent government says you can write one check.
Yeah.
It's just unreal.
Yeah.
And so right now, fundamentally we had no money. And the JCL, Sabkito was the president of that. And he actually subsidized us. After that, and Dad couldn't put money in the bank because it was gone as soon as you did. And so there are a lot of things that were going on that were bad, and the dominant reason we were put into camp But the farmers, the Japanese farmers, were actually doing more success in their farming than the Americans, and so they made the claim that all these airports and things were built there on the farms, and that's what they were used for, which was totally false, because it was just dirt there. There were, and they're the ones, though, that's where the executive and the legislative both fought for that and got the evacuation fund into law for California, Washington, and Oregon. And they also took us, who were in the city, because we didn't have any airports or anything like that there. So that was a thing. And Dad was actually working while we were in camp. He used the Bolt School of Law. Actually supplied him with books, so they sent all the books that were relevant to this, to that, and he during the time we were there, and he straightened me out on things like that a lot, when I was like 9 years old. But he said, there's three forms of government. It's got the legislative, executive, and the judicial. And the legislative and executive have taken a bad position, a wrong, incorrect position. And so the only ones we can work through is the judicial. And he wanted to have this case presented to the Supreme Court. And there was a person who became Secretary of State, I can't remember his name now.
Yeah, I think we showed about that last time too.
Yeah, but he pushed that through. So that was, that was his goal, was to stay within the legal system and process of the United States and fight it that way. And a lot of people don't believe I ever went to camp. And I think that the main reason I owe that to is my dad, because his feelings on that were in kind of the...
Why don't they believe you went to camp?
What?
Why don't they believe you went to camp?
They said that I'm not bitter, or don't, I don't have a lot of these, what I would call crazy notions about the evacuation. And it became much more pragmatic, about how that worked. And I think that, and Dad made a lot of progress. In fact, the case was won, and the person who worked on the case told Mike Masaoka, who was the head of the lobbyists for the Japanese Americans, and he told him this. I get these decisions with your dad, and your dad's always right, And so what that did to me was I was paying attention to it, and I wasn't seeing the negativeness of it as much as everybody else.
Much more productive.
Oh yeah, he was on a productive mode, but and that wasn't for me, but for the case. But it was.
Yeah, you're lucky to have that. I think
it was outstanding, and so even when I went to Salt Lake, people were concerned about what my attitude was going to be when I went there, and I was the only Japanese student there, and so it was. And that was interesting too. One of the things that was most interesting to me about that was, I always planned to come back to California. That's what I thought the natural sequence was. And when I left, the number of people crying was huge. And I felt like, well, I don't think I could get myself to cry. That bothered me as much as anything.
It's funny.
But it was the acceptance there was much higher, because I thought this was a temporary thing, right? And they were surprised that I was happy to leave. But but that taught, that's taught me a lot of negativism of the U.S. system. But what it also has done is made me stronger in terms of dealing with things, even in business or anything else, that have actually helped me more than others, because I don't go to the wall as
Right.
fast as a lot of people.
Yeah,
do.
you approach it in a pragmatic way.
And believe that dumb things occurring is not ridiculous. They
Right.
happen all the time.
That's for sure.
And that was so I'm actually grateful for that. And I think having Dad and his exposing me to a lot of the stuff was also critical. And that was, I was going to be a lawyer, and
Yep.
and so that was.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't become a lawyer.
Yeah, me too. Last time you when the tape ran out, you were going to talk about you and Mom meeting and stuff, and that whole. But we talked. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, we.
So you're in Japan.
Yeah, and the teacher there that knew my mother well wanted to know what was going on in the United States, so she called Toshiko and says, "Oh, do you want to meet Mrs. Togasaki?" So she said, "Oh, okay, yeah." So she came over, and I didn't know they were here at the house. That was totally a surprise to me. And so I'm coming down in my bathrobe with a cigarette hole in my bathrobe, unshaven and so forth, ready for breakfast. And then all of a sudden, this Mrs. Kayaba, who was Toshiko's English teacher, there, and my mother and Toshiko were there. And so I'm coming down the steps, and that's whom I meet. And that's what they see.
Yeah. She wasn't there to meet you, though, right?
No, we didn't know the other one existed. I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I
just
wouldn't come
happened to
down
meet
in my
there.
bathrobe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty.
So that was pretty funny.
Yeah. And then you stayed in Japan for a few weeks, 6 weeks?
Yeah, well, the date we were coming back, I was still working at IBM, so I had a committed date to return to IBM.
Yeah, but so you just met and then you just hung out for how long? 6 weeks? 4 weeks?
Probably closer to 4, yeah.
4 weeks and decided to get married?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, we decided to get married on a Saturday, and then they found a cancellation at the YMCA. A wedding at the YMCA was canceled, and this person was an executive with the YMCA, the husband of Toshiko's teacher. So we booked that and got married then. Went on a one-day honeymoon to Hakone, came back, spent the rest of the time at embassies and the Japanese consulate and got everything done.
It's pretty crazy.
It was pretty amazing.
And now you're married 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's
You made a good choice.
yeah, and in fact, the only person that was concerned about the marriage was the person who introduced us. Like
funny.
the others were all positive about it. It was really funny.
That is funny.
Thought I was too strong. But it was.
You're
really,
strong.
But it was funny, and it was just. And then that time one time after that, we took Iku took you, the four of us, and Iku went to see her at this rest home, and she was so happy to see us. I mean, she was just. It was not. She said, "I'm gonna be healthy now,"
That's good.
Yeah,
And so, did Mom move right after that to the United States?
well, no. So we got married on a Tuesday,
Okay.
and then we went to Hakone, and the first night, and hired a taxi to there, and then we came back to Tokyo to get the legal things, set.
Right.
And then on Thanksgiving, that was a Thursday. That's Mom and I flew back to the U.S. And Toshiko had a lot of things to do to leave, and she would never tell me when she was leaving. She didn't know. So
Okay.
So she came over in this. We got married in November, and she came over. I think it was April.
Oh, okay. Wow. Huh.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
but the only person that was, she was for it when we first talked, and then when I started saying I want this is done, she thought it was a bad thing, and then she switched, and then she. But all the others were really positive about the marriage. It's really interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
it's
It's kind of amazing, really.
Yeah, it really is. 50 years too. Yeah, that's another
Totally.
indicator.
I know. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's
Very cool.
it's amazing. Let's see. There's other people. You know, my mother and Mitsuya, Kiyoshi's wife, were closest friends
Oh, really?
as children. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's so weird.
In fact, after mother died, my dad's first wife died. That's when they they taught at the same university, Aoyama,
Oh,
and that's where Toshiko graduated from too.
okay.
And they were commenting about that, and this is what she's going to marry the father of Mitsuya, And everybody says, which one? Because her husband's father had like 10 or 11 kids, and and the kids would not let him remarry. Really against it, And so when my mother married Dad, he really went into a high depression. Which I don't know too much about there. Anyway.
See if I have any other questions. That's mostly it. I guess one question is a general question that I wonder about. The three doctors, to Yoshie and Kazue, just being doctors and women and Japanese at that time, and just how, if they struggled very much with, their careers or, being doctors at that time, if there was anything that they had to deal with.
Well, like, Kazue was kind of immune, because she was, OBGYN, and she was considered the best OBGYN by the whole Oriental community, and so that was...
I think it's great if they didn't. I'm just, how you just, even now you hear about the glass ceiling and the difficulties.
Yeah, she didn't have one.
Yeah.
And then...
it's probably different in medicine than in the corporation.
There are things in medicine that are there. Okay. Teru was a helper. I mean, she could care less about money or anything. She loved to, see patients and she, because she was a doctor, her income was always reasonable and she was never optimum to that. She actually went to Hawaii, moved from Hawaii to Hawaii, and they asked her to be the nurse of a doctor of the women's hospital. It was a women's jail. Oh. And she said, it was so unsanitary and overcrowded, and facilities were just unbelievably bad that she fought for a new jail, rebuild a new jail. Well, as far as the general, the public, the strong voters and so forth, they could care less about the women's jail than anything. But she actually won. Wow. And they actually built a whole new jail because of Teru. And then a lot of these people hated her guts. But on the other hand, it was really kind of hard to argue that they needed a jail. Was not it wasn't hard for giving arguments by her of why we really need this. And so she did that. And she actually ended up with a nervous breakdown. I mean, they tried to accuse her of everything. I mean, they're just unbelievable, the stuff they did against her to do it. Because, I mean, a jail is expensive. It has to be a lot bigger. Right. There's a number of people going to jail then versus, when they built the original one. And so, and that was not a Teru concern. I mean, she really believes in it. And when Teru really believes, it's really hard to argue with her. And she got that done there.
It's kind of a Tokusaki trait.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, hers is much stronger than mine. I'll tell you
that.
Wow. Oh yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And it's. I mean, it's from, it's not an idea. It's a must. And that's the way she lived her life, and it was always that way. And I'm not a must person that much. Yeah. And they really were really ticked that she was, and the people listened and they actually voted for it. She won, which they thought they could beat this idiot doctor
Yeah.
from America that had done that. But she was always a believer in doing the right thing. That was her goal. And wealth never bothered her. I mean, that was kind of the bottom of her list.
Yeah.
And being an MD, a good MD, she was, never broke. But on the other hand, she didn't require very much money either.
Yeah.
And then the best doctor, as far as a logical doctor, if you define medicine that way, was Yoshie.
Mm-hmm.
And her IQ is really high. Very bright person, and really believer in making things right, and did a huge amount in medicine. She actually volunteered to go to southern Italy, and Dad was really concerned because that was part of during World War II, and she was afraid that, my God, she may get killed. And so she went to an area that in southern Italy that never had a hospital. And so she went there, and she said, the conditions there are just unbelievable, going there from the United States and seeing what was there. And they just had no medicine at all there, and people were dying like crazy. And there were a lot of Germans there. Don't ask me why. Poor Germans, I think they shipped to southern Italy. And then she totally rebuilt the system there, And she went as a major, and she was a major and came out as a top colonel. And, they couldn't believe what she accomplished doing there. And I couldn't even think of the things she did, not to mention do.
That's so great.
And she was always that way.
Yeah.
And initially she started out with children in Los Angeles, so she was in charge of that for Los Angeles. And then she was either the second nurse for state of California, and that was in Berkeley. So she liked Berkeley. That was a good place to stay. And then they moved her to Sacramento, so Contra Costa County hired her as in charge of pediatrics at Contra Costa County, and she was outstanding there, and did a lot of work, throughout the West Coast. And she, like one time she wanted to do this project in Northern California, and it says, "What's this?" This is secondhand, but it's like, "What's this Jap doing, trying to do these experiments in Northern California, so all our children will die," and that's what she wants, And so she went up there, and she said, "The reason I'm here is that when I was starting out in medicine, we did this experiment here, and it was better than any experiment we had for children in California. And it was incredibly successful, well performed, and the people here who sponsored and participated in it made a huge difference in terms of the progression of childhood diseases because of it." Okay, and all of a sudden they were all ready to call her names, right? Now, what are you going to call her?
Right. Yeah.
And the experiment went well, and it actually advanced the cure of these diseases, throughout California right after that, and then all across the United States. But that's where she is that her mental organization and commitment is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree.
And positive.
Yeah, I think I knew her the best.
I think she, the real sad one is that, there are very few Japanese that, like, not a doctor, you wouldn't marry a doctor, because it's like you kind of reverse roles.
Oh, right.
And there were much fewer marriages there, that way. And even among men, I think having a person like that as the wife could be hard. But I mean, the one thing she did want to do is be married.
Yeah.
And that's really sad.
Yeah.
I think if she was 30 years younger, she would have been married.
Yeah. Right.
But,
yeah. Yeah. Just the wrong time.
Yeah. But she logically is just unbelievably solid, you know. So.
Yeah.
But she was always supportive, and she managed the women's house in dorm in Berkeley.
Oh.
It was on the other side of the campus there. They bought two houses, one for men, one for women.
Yeah.
She did the.
Interesting.
Yeah, and her efficiency is just unreal, unbelievable. I think most men might become depressed.
Or inspired.
Yeah.
Be inspired by smart, powerful women, don't you think?
Yeah, it's
I think.
much more today than then.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. If you go back to
it's a good time.
The 20s or something like that.
Yeah, I know. It's a camera.
Camera.
Say hi, Mom. Say hi. Say hello. Hi.
Yeah, things like this are really good though.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think should we stop? I mean, it's been an hour. It's been an hour. I'm gonna stop.